Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge Company. The book, The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor, The Life and Times of Tony Mazzocchi, is as good as its title, and it's a great title. Les Leopold has written a riveting biography of a most remarkable man, and I'm glad to say he's here today so we can talk about it. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
I didn't want to put it down. I mean, this is a biography and actually a history, really, of labor which period? It spans.
Well, the context is roughly, from the late 30s right through pretty much through today, yeah.
And it was riveting. I mean, I just couldn't put it down. And of course, after I was finished, it was so inspiring. I wanted to go out and once again try to change the world.
Well, if it had that kind of impact on you, then it succeeded.
Yeah, it brought me back from my cynicism. Tony Mazzocchi was a remarkable man. Let's talk about who he was and where he came from, and how do you think this happened, that he became such a committed optimist about changing the world for, justice and peace and everything that we believe in?
Yeah, it's a puzzle that I've been working on all the way through the book and when it was done, and I'm still thinking about it. He grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn at a time where it was very tumultuous. It was actually a very positive time. Unions were starting to blossom. There was a lot of controversy in New York City and in the country. He's born in 1926, so when he's about 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, Roosevelt is on the radio. He's hearing all these arguments, and the CIO is starting to take off, Congress of Industrial Organizations, the big new progressive
from the American Federation.
Right, the big new labor movement is starting, and his mom died when he was young, and his dad took the 4 kids and moved in with grandma in this kind of big collective home in Bensonhurst. And it was a place that people talked about politics all the time. His father was kind of a low-level union steward in the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, and he was sort of a social democrat, maybe a little bit left of that, but not terribly bold on that. He had another uncle, or actually an uncle-in-law, I think, who was fond of Charles Lindbergh's American First Committee, sort of a proto-fascist organization. He had another uncle who was a closet gay member of the Communist Party. And the dinner table was just alive with conversation. And something about this, there was only one kid that actually sat through and argued with them all the time, and that was this guy, Tony Mazzocchi. He was a natural leader on the streets. He was a little guy, not tough or anything like that, but the toughs in the neighborhood really liked him. They gathered around him. He was a good storyteller. He wasn't very good at school, but he was a great reader, and so he grew up a lot on the streets as well. And the Mazzochis in general, I got to interview a few before they died, some of the older ones, tended to be very, very nice, optimistic people. As Tony put it, if the world was coming to the end, his sisters would run to the door to catch the last sunset. I mean, that's what they were like. And so
his grandmother came from Italy and did quite well.
Well,
or grandfather? Or?
Well, the grandmother actually couldn't read or write, but she ran this household with an iron hand, and they had boarders, and then they eventually pooled their money and bought a boarding house in western New Jersey. So Tony actually spent the summers in the country. But I think he brought his optimism kind of matured during World War II. He enlisted when he was 16 years old. This was the great war against fascism, and he was already, fighting for the cause and defending the American all-worker people now in the Great War. He was sent down to Camp Stewart, Georgia. He arrives. Within 2 days of his arrival there, a race war breaks out on the base because the Army was segregated, and the northern black troops that came down obviously didn't like it. And at one point, this shooting war, a couple thousand rounds of live ammunition were shot back and forth, and Mazzocchi got his first big insight into the negativity of racism. And he started to develop this phrase that he used for the rest of his life, which is, things can get really ugly if we don't have a positive direction. And this was reinforced by the rest of his experiences in the war. He was sent over to, he was in a half-track anti-aircraft artillery, and he ended up in the Battle of the Bulge. At one point, the retreating Allied troops came within a mile of where he was positioned. He was almost on the wrong side of the lines, but he came out okay. Now he's, what, 17, maybe 18 at most. And he saw how plastic, in a way, the world was, malleable. He saw whole cities destroyed, new ones built up for the troops. All these people were fed, clothed, educated about military things, and he saw that social change to him was like right there in front of him.
So the Army had a very
powerful impact.
Yeah.
He had a platoon leader that ran discussion groups, not a lefty or anything like that, just talked to the young kids that he had, and he took them to Buchenwald shortly after it was liberated, maybe a week after, 2 weeks after, and Tony saw the piles of teeth. He saw these ovens. It wasn't a gas chamber camp. They worked people to death and then they put them in these ovens. And the ovens, there were rows and rows of them. And they were all carefully crafted by German ironworkers. There was a lunchroom there for the people tending the ovens that was modern with light, good working conditions. And Tony had this flash that he said, it was so clear to him that working people could be organized to build hospitals and schools or death camps. And it could go either way. And something clicked for him during this period where he had this feeling that he could help build a positive path for working people. And the rest of his life, when he came back, was dedicated to that. And he was never the kind of person that got negative. Every setback, he would just say, hey, don't worry about that.
Let's think about this.
Yeah, we got to move forward, because he felt that he had the leadership qualities, that he could organize people on this positive path. And if he didn't do it, things could get ugly.
But he didn't have the ego that went along with assuming the credit for doing the organizing or the leading, right?
No, because he came up in an era where organizer was the high calling. If you were a union organizer, that was as good as being a banker today in certain circles. I mean, that was, well, banker may not be the right word today, but an entrepreneur. It was a high calling, and to be a smart organizer meant you had to get hundreds, thousands of people involved. And his ego was so solid that we had lots of talks about this, and he said, look, you don't have to go toot your own horn. If you get all these other people involved and they all feel like they're getting credit for it, don't worry. You'll get enough credit. Right. And more importantly,
you'll achieve your goal.
Yeah, you may actually win something.
So he came back from the Army, and then he went to different things. I mean, they had this wonderful program that made an impression on him. Didn't 5220, was it called?
Oh, God, yeah.
That's when the veterans came back and received $20 a week for 52 weeks?
Right, which was 2/3 the average wage. And he thought this was like the guaranteed annual wage.
Income.
Yeah. And he also got his brother's, the GI Bill to go to school. His brother was worried that he was going to kick around the streets of Bensonhurst and end up in the mob. So he said, why don't you learn a skill? And he went to carpal dental school on the Upper West Side, and he learned how to repair teeth. It was a 2-year program. The tuition was higher than Harvard's. It was paid for
by the
GI Bill, and he got a stipend. And if you're married, you got a bigger stipend. And
but in between, he did work on an assembly line. And it did bother him, didn't it? The boredom of it?
He had a great line. He said, I worked a couple of years in manual labor, and that's why I became a labor bureaucrat, so I never had to work again. His uncle got him a job at the Ford auto plant, which was over here in Weehawken, and he couldn't believe what it was like. It was so repetitive and so boring, and it was so difficult for him to do it. He did it for about 6 months, and one day someone tapped him on the shoulder when a bell rang, and he said, "What was that bell?" And the guy said, "Well, it's lunch." And he thought it was like the first break in the day, first hour. He kind of he said, oh my God, I got to get out of here. So there was a layoff, and he left and never came back.
So then he landed up at Helena Rubinstein,
right,
working, and that was really the beginning, wasn't it, of his awareness of the conditions that workers had to put up with to work?
Well,
was it?
No, he actually, because he'd kicked around, he'd had 4 or 5 different jobs, all of which he left as quickly as possible. When he got to Helena Rubinstein, he actually had a mission already. He was kind of sent in there to take over the union.
Oh, that's right.
And to bring it into a rival union. This was all Cold War, communist, anti-communist struggle going on. And a more left-leaning union, District 65 in New York, wanted him to raid Helena Rubinstein and bring it into District 65. Raid meaning take it over and move it from one union to the other. But when he got there, he realized that he could rise to the top. There was about 500 people, mostly women workers on the assembly line. But he wasn't going to raid it, because he felt that the people there didn't want to go to another union, that were very proud of it. And so he was determined now to make this a model union. This was going to be the most militant union that he could build. And he was starting virtually from scratch. I mean, there was a strike there 9 years earlier. So he set up and how he did it was actually
employing a lot of the techniques and things that or a lot of the things he learned in the Army. I mean, talking to people. Wasn't that an important thing?
Yes, and books. He spent a lot of his time in the Army reading. He couldn't sleep. He was so scared of, bombs going off all around him, shells going off. He read and read and read. And he thought the path, a political education through books, was the path to militancy, that one of the paths. And he started this little informal book club, and he got, he and the workers I interviewed said that the dominant themes in the plant was, basically everybody was racist, anti-Semitic, called everybody by, every bad name they could call. And Tony walked in a situation and said, you know what, that makes me uncomfortable, you guys got to stop. And they didn't know why they had to stop, but they kind of respected him. He was a little older, he was a war veteran. And he started passing out books like Howard Fast's Freedom Road, which is a very good book, actually, about the divisions between black and white in the South after it's fiction after the Civil War. And this book club caught on. They were all high school dropouts, including him. And they started passing around books. And it got to the point where they were reading things like the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I went, what? You're reading Homer? And I interviewed people separately, and either they all bought this mythology, or they actually did read it, and I think they actually did read it.
And this was a guy who dropped out of school in 9th grade, when he was 16 years old.
That's right. And these other people were...
Is that a commentary on the education system? It was alone aside. We're not going to get through this life, because it's just such an enticing life story. So was that... When did the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union come? Was that from Helena Rubinstein? I don't remember.
Helena Rubinstein was part of Gas, Coke, and Chemical Workers, which was a union that threw out all its left-wing people and then collapsed because they had nobody left that had any spirit in it. And they were forced to basically merge with the oil workers. Now, this was really interesting, because by that point already, Tony was the plant had moved to Roslyn, Long Island. Supposedly the Silent 50s, was actually very militant on Long Island. Tony had helped rebuild the AFL-CIO, which was now the AFL-CIO in Long Island Federation of Labor. He was getting active in anti-nuclear testing issues. He was very worried about all the fallout that was coming from all these explosions that were taking place during the Cold War. And now he merges into a union that had, and the new union has 10,000 workers in it that make nuclear weapons. They're atomic workers. Yeah. And what he didn't realize was the oil workers, who were an original CIO union, reasonably progressive. He didn't know this at the time, but they were the conduit for the CIA to control, manipulate oil workers' unions in the Middle East and in Latin America. So there were actual CIA agents who were members of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers, and he walks right into this union and tries to rise to the top of it.
So interesting when you talk about oil, CIA, and you look at Iraq. I mean, the whole connection, it never stops, does it?
Well, there's a direct connection. A matter of fact, a guy came to Tony and bragged to him, an oil worker, that he got into Mossadegh's office, the leader of Iran, who was overthrown by the CIA in 1953, that he got into the office before the CIA did in that coup.
And so
he got in there to capture the office even before the CIA people arrived. And that guy tried to become, basically they tried to make him president of Tony's union, and Tony knocked him out.
So what happened as he went along? I mean, he had to keep peace with the atomic workers, and he saw the perversion of the intent of the oil workers, and at the same time, he was doing health and safety work. The issues, I mean, the environment that all these workers worked in.
He had an aha moment. When his guys got into, he formed a coalition in 1965. His person became president, and he was given the job as legislative director in Washington, D.C. And he started getting all these calls from around the country where people were complaining about dust. They called it dust in the workplace. That was the point where there, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire, and these workplaces were absolute hellholes. And nobody knew the word toxics. Nobody knew how dangerous this stuff was. People were coughing, et cetera, et cetera. And so he got all these complaints. He didn't know what to do. There wasn't a law. And he started to explore these things. And his aha moment had two parts. One was he was the first person, this is hard to believe, the first person who figured out that all pollution starts in the workplace. If you read Rachel Carson carefully, which Tony did, and early Barry Commoner work, which is excellent stuff, they don't talk about the workplace. The workplace is a black box. Everything happens after the workplace. And inside this box was like a mystery. Nobody really cared much what went on inside there. So Tony figured out, you know what, if there's pollution on the outside, it starts on the inside. So that was his ability, that gave him the ability to link workers with the environmental community. And his second aha moment was that pollution, toxics, exposures to workers was a direct result of the drive for productivity and profit inside the plant. So if he could rally workers around occupational safety and health, and link them with the environmentalists, you could challenge the corporate order in a very positive, progressive way. So he saw the makings of a very large, powerful movement. And he did something that no other labor leader has ever been able to do. Some are trying now, but he did this between 1968 basically and 1975. He turned his union into thinking it was the leading environmental organization in the country. Because he didn't call health and safety, he called it hazards in the workplace environment. He appropriated environment, right, inside and outside, it's all one environment. And these atomic workers, these oil workers, especially the oil workers, really started to see themselves as leaders of an environmental movement. And in fact, it became such a powerful thing that Tony was selected to be chairperson at the first Earth Day here at Union Square in, I think, 1970.
I worked for John Lindsay then, and that was a big event here.
And Lindsay was there. And Tony was the chairperson, as he put it, not because of my good looks, but because people recognized this leading role that the oil, chemical, atomic workers were playing. So when I was working on this book, it was like, I never really put this all together, but I realized what a remarkable achievement. He had taken this, hard scrabble union of very conservative people, didn't like the boss, but they were pro-Cold War, pro-nuclear weapons, the kind of people you would think would be hanging in effigy environmentalists, turned them into a leader of the environmental cause. And OCAW, till it merged away in 2000, was actually perceived as one of the most progressive unions in the country. And he kept talking about we, never took credit for it, but when I go back and look at it, he deserves the lion's share.
And uncovered such, really connecting to personal illnesses and loss of life from all this work.
The story that I tell that is, in a way, there are many shocking stories. He's uncovered the whole asbestos controversy.
Absolutely.
The one that really got to me was there was a plant near Chicago that made a food additive for cattle. And this additive, the production was so sloppy, this additive was everywhere. In
the factory,
they opened up the telephone in the pay.
Yeah.
They used to have pay telephones in
Right.
those days. They opened it up, and this white powder just poured right out. Well, the impact it was all male workforce. The impact on the men, they grew breasts. The people were having mastectomies and double mastectomies. That's the impact. That's what the workplace was like. Needless to say, they made a big deal over this. There's actually a funny story because Tony brought them in to testify before Congress, and he told Congress that they had no protective gear, none. And at one point, one of the men was being questioned, and they said, "Did you ever have any? What the company ever give you anything?" And the guy said yes, and Tony got, oh God, here we go. The guy's going to pull out a respirator. The guy reaches into his bag, and what does he pull out?
A bra.
A bra. That's what the boss gave him, a bra.
Was there a split in Congress with Republicans and Democrats? I mean, did they see this as an ultimate anti-corporate position? It
was more subtle. Tony had built such a powerful movement that it's interesting. The Secretary of Labor, before OSHA was passed, said over his dead body would it pass. A year later, he was there at the signing saying how wonderful it was. It was a hard. They worked behind the scenes to over time. They crippled OSHA's power, but there was a period where Tony used it from like about when it started all the way up, I guess, till Reagan. They used it very, very effectively, especially when Eula Bingham was the Assistant Secretary of Labor. They used it very effectively, and it was subtle. I mean, the Republicans were chipping away at it.
So was he responsible for the creation of OSHA to begin with?
A lot of people give him credit for that, and he's responsible for, I think, building the political muscle to put it over the top. He didn't write the bill. He worked closely with other unions, especially the steelworkers. Ralph Nader was bringing the consumer groups in. But Tony was an interesting kind of lobbyist in Washington. He hated to lobby. He spent no time on the Hill. So he made a deal with the other union people saying, you take care of the lobbying, I'm taking this to the streets. Yeah. And he set up these hazards in the workplace environment hearings, kind of worker hearings.
In communities.
Yeah, 9 of them around the country. And workers came in and testified about their conditions. And Tony had it all transcribed and given to Congress, and it was hellacious stuff. These became so popular. The Today Show actually came in live and covered one of the hearings that they were doing in Atlanta, and those hearings and the mobilization around them is what's credited with really creating a new kind of awareness in the country.
So he was the strategist for
the strategist and the person who built the movement with enough muscle.
And he had this great talent, didn't he, of attracting very accomplished people and wanting them around him.
Well,
I mean, the sign of a really great leader.
Well, there's another whole story we could get into here, but he realized right away that what you needed were experts to team up with workers at local facilities to uncover these toxics problems and do something about them, that it was a technical subject. How he had testified before a hearing in 1967 and got clobbered. And he realized he was never going to go in there alone again without somebody with him.
An expert.
And the problem was there were no experts. There were no worker-oriented professionals. Right. So Tony had this, again, another aha moment. Well, some people started from the technical community, sort of like 60s radicals with skills, started coming his way because the whole movement was like getting pretty negative at that point in the late 60s. You know, things were getting pretty bad. And people were looking for something that was hopeful. Here was this very hopeful guy kind of running a small operation, and people started coming in to volunteer, and he started sending them out to different places. Why don't you work with this plant, work with that plant? These were docs and technical people, and they started having incredible successes. And he realized, my God, why don't we try to really promote the idea of a worker-oriented occupational safety and health medical profession? And he's credited with starting that whole, basically creating a new field of medicine. And I interviewed 4 or 5 different docs who literally had their lives changed after he spoke to them. They'd never thought about workers, and he would tell them about these horrendous conditions at forums. He would go up and speak at Harvard and other places and public health school, and people would say, that's what I want to do. And they would change their lives, and they became involved in occupational safety and health.
So when he went to these experts, it was a dual purpose in a way, was to validate the conditions or investigate them more, and also to inform the workers themselves of the danger? Was it that way?
Actually, both those things. And what he's trying to do was fuse the technical expertise with the kind of worker understanding of how you build things at the shop floor. So he'd bring them in with very good local leaders. And a lot of times the docs and the interns learn more from the local leaders.
Right.
And Tony's line used to be, every single discovery of a health and safety problem started with a worker finding it first. But to be able to actually do a study and actually
validate that
and defend it in front of the press and take on the corporate docs, because that's all there were then, required some outside muscle. And this wonderful thing started happening. He opened up the union and brought these people in. They became very much a part of the cause. And you know what? A lot of people really grew and developed. And I think the whole thing that we now see, almost every union's got a health and safety department. There are all these people who now care about this kind of stuff. COSH groups, they're called Committees on Safety and Health. There's a great one in New York. NICOSH, they all started with directly out of Mazzocchi's work.
And this is all from a school dropout.
Ninth grade dropout. Matter of fact, he had a terrific facility for science. I mean, if you talk to him, he would remember the phrases, the names. He absorbed it remarkably well, and people really respected his scientific prowess.
We haven't even gotten halfway through his life or what
goodness.
he's done, and we're finished with this program, so we're going to have to continue this discussion. This book is fascinating, and it's filled with all these things, and I'm ahead of us now, so I know people will be interested in what's to come. But thank you so much, Les, because this is fabulous, and this is the book, The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.